report. And it is after these criticisms came both from me and the United States that he set up this ministerial task force on trafficking in persons. Now, setting up the task force is one thing. You've got at least 4 ministries involved. One is his own ministry, the Ministry of Home Affairs. 2, you've got the Ministry of Amerindian Affairs. You've got most of the victims are indigenous girls. Then you've got the Ministry of Local Government and Regional Development. And you also have the Ministry of Human Services, which of course is meant to provide protection for these young girls. So you've got 4 ministries, and he is the hub, he's the senior minister. But instead of establishing procedures, instead of doing the enforcement that is necessary, by visiting these camps, logging camps, mining camps, and hinterland areas, he is depriving the very agencies of the resources. Now, I have been to some of these areas. There was a case in one area that I visited, and I have evidence about this, in which the mother complained that her 13-year-old daughter was taken into a camp. She complained to the police. The police have to depend on the very minor who is trafficking, the minors who are trafficking in the girls, to get transport to go to the mining camps. So, I mean, the situation is ludicrous. Somebody is trafficking your daughter, you have to ask the person who's trafficking your daughter for transport. And of course, the police don't get transport to go to the scene. And I was told this by a police auxiliary in the particular area that I'm speaking about. And it happens in other areas too. When I was down south in the Rupununi, we were told about, and again, the Minister of Human Services refuted my report, that girls in a certain mining community in the south were being raffled on Saturday nights. You know, it is really a terrible situation. But the ministry wants to look good. They want to send international reports because they are signatories to international conventions. So all they want is a clean report. And they feel that by refuting these allegations, they will look good in the eyes of the international community. But it's a false security, a false sense of security, because the people themselves know that there is trafficking. And that is why my colleague pointed out that in Bartica, which is one of the hubs of logging and mining and tourism, and you've got, when you go to Bartica, you've got Brazilians, you've got Colombians, you've got other foreigners. Bartica itself is a point of entry, a port of entry. It has an immigration cell. It has, it's a big growing community, and many people of different nationalities go to Bartica, and there is insufficient, and I'm saying so categorically, there is insufficient law enforcement resource in the entire Cuyuni-Mazruni region to cater for this gold rush. Once there's gold, there are lots of people coming in there with ulterior motives. There are criminals, there are bandits, there are traffickers, there are shopkeepers, there are miners, and I do not think that the law enforcement has kept abreast with the gold rush. It has not kept abreast with the economic transformation that is taking place in the Cuyuni-Mazruni region. And that is why we've had massacres at Bartica. That's why we've had so much trafficking problems. That's why we have so much abuses. That's why we have contamination of the rivers. That's why we've had so many diseases. Up to now, people in the Upper Mazruni, indigenous people, have the government of Guyana in court. We have a situation now in the Upper Mazruni, a region, an area that was never touched before by contamination. The Ministry of Amerindian Affairs is giving permission to miners to go into those areas, places that were protected. And that is why the indigenous communities have so much grievance, so much dissatisfaction with the People's Progressive Party civic administration. But rather than protect our own people, rather than the Ministry of Home Affairs protecting our young girls, we are pretending that there's no problem. You know, once I spoke to a miner, he says, you know, if you want to make an omelette, you have to break the egg. You know, he was explaining environmental degradation. If you want an omelette, you have to break the egg. So he's saying that the damage to the hinterland is an inevitable consequence of economic development. Well, I don't accept that. I believe that both human rights and economic or environmental integrity could be preserved and economic development can proceed. But here we have a situation when we're speaking about the protection of the indigenous citizens. We know the girls are poor, we know the families are sometimes under stress because the father has to go into his farm, the mother has to go and do some other business, the young girls go into the mining areas, and that's the end of it, of their career development, that's the end of their education. So Mr. Rohi has not been doing enough. Although there are 4 ministries involved, as I mentioned, Ministry of Marine Affairs, Ministry of Human Services, Ministry of Home Affairs, as well as Ministry of Local Government, his ministry is critical because he has responsibility for public security. And his business is not to refute what David Granger says. His business is not to refute what Hillary Clinton says. His business is to protect our young girls. He's not doing that.
Okay. I want to talk a bit about ports and borders. And Mr. Felix, you mentioned that, Guyana was also identified as a major destination point for trafficking. I don't know if this is too much, but could you possibly say what can we do specifically to strengthen our ports and borders to prevent this or minimize it?
Before you go, I must add that some of the trafficking is internal. It's still trafficking. It's not necessarily leaving the country, but I just wanted to supplement that because all of it is not external. Some of it is internal.
Right, and we have most of our problems would be internal, moving from one community to another. What I do know, one example, a case I had a few years before I left, where a young lady was taken to an island in the Caribbean on the pretext that she's going to work, and upon arriving in the island, they took away her passport, and she was at the mercy of the trafficker thereafter. I can hardly say how that matter was resolved because she was out there. Coming into Guyana, we know we have our southern neighbor, and the interior has been inundated with arrivals from that end. And there are reports of many young girls, as the opposition leader pointed out. The border is very long and unpatrolled, and it is difficult to really, just by luck you might intercept them, and that is why I called for raids on camps, right? Because a surprise visit would enable the security force, the police in particular, to intercept those who are there legally, those who are there illegally, and whether the bona fides of their presence must be established. So enforcement, again, is an important issue.
Okay, all right. Viewers, we're going to open up the phone lines in a bit, but I must ask this, aside from the fact that Minister Rohi is definitely incompetent and he should resign from that post, both Mr. Granger and Mr. Felix, do you believe that we have probably enough trained persons, aside from in the police force, trained persons to deal with trafficking in persons, to deal with measures that can possibly be put in place to eliminate or minimize the occurrences of trafficking in persons?
Let me put the crime of trafficking in persons in context. It's not the only crime. There are other crimes that you have read about recently in the newspaper. One, of course, is child labor. That underage children are working in the mines, they're working in factories, they're working in logging areas. Some of them might have been school dropouts, but it is a crime to employ children under a certain age in certain types of employment. There's also juvenile prostitution.
Okay.
Again, these crimes emerge because of poverty, and again, there's been very little enforcement about it. The Ministry of Education sweeps the matter under the carpet. They feel that there is no juvenile prostitution. But recently there have been reports that there have been cases of prostitution. So all the crimes must be put in context. What we need is a new attitude by a new type of minister, new type of Ministry of Home Affairs, which understands that there are pressures on human society. Law enforcement is not just a matter of police and thief. It's not just a matter of burglary and traffic accidents. There are crimes in the home, there's domestic violence, there are crimes in school, children stab one another, there are crimes at the New Opportunity Corps, there are crimes of wandering. And we need a minister who has got a holistic view of the changes that have taken place in society and a new approach to protecting citizens, protecting children and the vulnerable members of society. So it's not just a matter of banditry and piracy. We are looking at human society now, and our children are vulnerable, and we need a new type of law enforcement regime which understands that if this happens, we are going to get a new type of training in addition to what the police are using, or normal enforcement training. We're going to get a more sympathetic type of training which deals with counseling. That is why I've always insisted that we need community policing, but we need a new type of community policing where police will be training enforcement tactics, will be able to sit down with communities and protect those communities. Every now and then, at remote areas, remote villages, on the quarantine, or in the Essequibo Islands, you hear about some 79-year-old widow being raped and murdered. I mean, policing, if community policing, if it is properly done, if it is properly understood, could prevent that type of crime, because the community would be aware that they are vulnerable citizens. If you go to Wakadam, you see a little stone monument at the side where a little 11-year-old girl was raped and murdered, going to school 8 o'clock in the morning. If we're going to have community policing, it must protect the very young and the very old. So what I'm saying is that we need a Ministry of Home Affairs which is so sensitive to the changes which are taking place in society. And some changes lead to greater sexual abuse. And when we're speaking about human trafficking, a lot of it is sexual exploitation. When we speak about some of these crimes taking place in the schools and child prostitution and so on, a lot of it is sexual in nature, of course. So we need the type of police training. And also we need more women police who can deal with these issues in a more sympathetic manner. Sometimes I must admit that there have been reports that young women go to complain. Sometimes they're ashamed. Sometimes they feel that the policemen themselves are in league with their oppressors, are in league with the perpetrators of the crimes. So very frequently we find that the old-fashioned police do not respond sympathetically to reports of these crimes. Or they try to prove it's consensual. Or if you didn't dress like that, the man would have never, it's silly. What we need are more policewomen. We need special areas in police stations. We need a special concept of community policing, so that when there is a hint that something is going wrong in society, women police could go and investigate these crimes. Sometimes we know, even on the Essequibo coast, where there are rum shops, young girls are brought out of the missions or the community settlements, and they work in those rum shops. And we know when the men get drunk or they get high and they're looking for, fun, that the girls are made into victims. It might not be trafficking in the old definition, but you need to have policewomen who will go to these establishments and say, young girl, where are you from? How old are you? What are you doing here? How much you work for? And they start a process that allows, I would say, prosecution to take place once it is established that there is exploitation or there is trafficking. And I do feel that the old form of policing is not incisive enough, it's not insightful enough to find out when there are indicators of trafficking and take protective or preventive action. So sometimes it's too late. Sometimes the girl's health is ruined, sometimes they get pregnant, or they get infected with some disease and they sent back to the mission. By that time it's too late. So we need a person in the Ministry of Home Affairs who has a completely different approach to law enforcement. We're not talking about bandits and pirates here. We're talking about smooth operators, women who sometimes go to attract these young girls to go into these areas. So you're not going to find a male with a gun threatening young girls. You're going to find a female who promises them jobs and gets them involved in this type of criminal activity. And we need a new type of policing. We need a new type of training for police women who go to police college to pick up, to identify, to look for the indicators for this type of crime. And this is what the women miners have been doing. At Bardica, it is the Guyana Women Miners Association which is making a hue and a cry about it, because the male, perhaps it is possible that the male miners never really paid attention to that, but the women are. So this is what we need in the police force as well.
Okay. I know our viewers are and our callers are anxious, but Mr. Felix, I must ask you this, as the opposition leader mentioned it. Is there anything that we can possibly do to encourage females to join the Guyana police force so that they can be trained to deal with these matters?
Well, you know, if we reach out to the Amerindian communities in particular, where the practice is prevalent, I'm sure we're going to get recruits. And to return them there, prepare them for this issue so that they go back there understanding among their roles that this is one.
Okay.
So there is something we can do to get females, and I would advocate females from the affected communities.
Okay, all right. Viewers, well, it's now your turn to ask questions. As usual, I'll open up the phone lines, turn the volumes of your television sets down, and be respectful. Caller, welcome. Caller?
Good afternoon.
Yes, good afternoon.
Panel, I agree 80% with what Mr. Granger said, also the former commissioner of police.
Could you speak up a bit for us?
I was saying I totally,
Yes.
80% agree with the contributions of Mr. Granger and Mr. Felix.
Okay.
My concern, however, is for Parliament and how it's operating. Because I'm hearing the opposition of the things that are affecting the strata of our community, of our country, our citizens of the country. For instance, with the prostitution, the drug trafficking, and so on. But I'm saying, how does this relate to Parliament as a whole? If they see this, the PPP side sees this, can they, because now the opposition is highlighting these things, instead of just turning a blind eye and say, okay, this is not happening, can they not join forces with the opposition? Isn't that how Parliament is supposed to operate? Now tackle this thing together. If you hear, okay, we have a government, but then it's a PPP government. I think something is wrong there. And when I hear what's taking place in the interior, and in terms of the joblessness and the poverty, I'm thinking the women of word that I hear so much about, I think that's Minister Webster is in charge of that.
Yeah.
How effective is that in that area? Because listen, and I'm hearing that that is what that ministry is raised up to help women, and I'm hearing that it's women that are really affected. I know men are affected too, because sometimes we focus on the prostitute. It's for female, but there are men too, and how are they using this money effectively? Because I've been listening to a program recently with Channel 11, I think it was Nia Saban was interviewing her, and she talked about her success. And in the light of what I'm hearing now, then there isn't any success yet until you have a breakthrough in this area and we see a decline. If we continue to see an increase and there's no solution to the problem, then there's no success in the ministry. And again, I want to say, what I want to see is the opposition and the other side of the house working together.
Okay. Thank you very much, caller. Before we get responses from the gentleman, I'd like to say you posed a very good question, because I myself would like to hear from Minister Webster regarding her ministry and exactly what it's doing to help the females, because we haven't seen or heard much from her. Additionally, you spoke about a program that you saw. NCN and Gina, they're designed to lie to Guyana. So they will that's why I always tell people, when you're looking, you need to figure out the sense from the nonsense. And as always I say, there's not much sense there. So at Gina and NCN, they're designed to lie to the public and push propaganda and stage these interviews. Gentlemen.
Well, I think this is a question we both can answer, and I'll take the first bite. The National Assembly contains people from the executive branch, and of course, we as opposition members come from, you can say, the legislative branch, but we do not have executive power. We can advise, we can bring motions in the National Assembly, but when you're speaking about trafficking in persons, when you're speaking about public security, when you're speaking about child prostitution, when you're speaking about child labor, you need enforcement, you need executive action. And we have used our position in Parliament to articulate some of these grievances that affect our population. But in the final analysis, we are a legislative body. We are the legislative branch of government. Is the executive branch. Government has three branches: the judicial, or the judiciary branch, the executive branch, and legislative branch. And each branch has separate functions to perform. We make laws. We can advise. We can bring motions, but we cannot run the police force. It is the Minister of Home Affairs. It is the executive branch, the cabinet, the People's Progressive Party Civic Administration, which has executive power. So we can do everything within the law, but we cannot actually send out policemen and arrest traffickers. So our powers are limited, and we must understand that the legislative branch, even though at present the opposition has one-seat majority, it is the executive branch which has responsibility, and that is why we took a position at the end of July to bring a motion of no confidence in the Minister of Home Affairs, because he simply cannot deal with these problems that we do, particularly this one now in trafficking in persons.
Yes, to respond to the caller, we do have a relationship in Parliament, and what we do is to provide questions to the government. We move motions which are debated. The questions are answered by the government. So if there are issues in this society or in the country that we are concerned about, we either ask a question or we bring a motion. In that way, the matter is discussed. But as the leader of the opposition says, though we have a one-seat majority, we are not the government. And as such, it is for the government to act. And as a consequence of the government not acting through the Minister of Home Affairs, that is why we brought the vote of no confidence in him. That is legally acceptable in the parliamentary affairs of this country, and a Partnership for National Unity has done it.
Caller, welcome.
Afternoon.
Good afternoon.
On your entirely panel, Mr. David Ranger and Mr. Felix. I have a question here that I would like to ask in terms of this whole things that we normally hear that policemen is being disciplined, and their behavior, despite of what their behavior might be, they be disciplined. And I would like that the minister, the former commissioner police, can tell these Guyanese people that what is the discipline is put in place for some of these policemen that behave unmannerly on the road, especially in terms of taking advantage. I've known cases that men go to the station, and I'm glad that the Brigadier David Granger is here to listen to this matter. Men go to the police station, to make complaint and make allegation against their wife, abusive them, and police never turn up. Never turn up to make arrest or to look into this matter. When they got the policemen laughing and say, "Man, you make your wife hate you, man? Eh? You what kind of man?" So when things get out of hand and he pick up something and he do something wrong, then we hold on to the man and says that which means he's wrong for the way he did. But then what the police have been doing. So I want to know that if the commissioner police can tell us what is the discipline to the police force when them disrespecting the Guyanese people.
Okay, thank you, caller. Unfortunately, that was our final call for today.
Okay. There is a disciplinary code found in the laws of Guyana, chapter 17:01, which sets out all the disciplinary offenses from section 4.1 to 4Z. And the procedure is also laid out there. I mean the procedure for setting up a disciplinary inquiry into an alleged breach of discipline. Now, once a constable or any rank has offended a citizen, the citizen has a right to report to the station sergeant, the subdivisional officer, the divisional commander. You have the Office of Professional Responsibility. You have the chairman of the Police Complaint Authority. You can even access the office of the commissioner himself. Now, wherever the complaint is made, it ought to be investigated and a report put up, and somebody decides on the disciplinary charge. And like I told the group in this week, during this week, you might not believe it, but there are numerous charges flowing from misconduct of policemen which have been reported by the public. What happens sometimes is that after the policeman has been charged, he's been able to access the complainant, and as such, the matter is put to rest by an arrangement between the two, so that accessing the witness to come to court to attend what we call orderly room, which is the area in which the charge is heard, it is sometimes unsuccessful to get that witness to attend. But those who attend and give evidence, once the case is proven, you have a penalty ranging from reprimand straight on to dismissal. And of course, there is an opportunity for appeal.
Okay, opposition leader, any thoughts on the question?
I can only supplement what Mr. Felix has said. The public should be aware that the main agencies in this regard are the Police Complaints Authority and to some extent the Office of Professional Responsibility. I have criticized both of them publicly. One, the Police Complaints Authority, Mr. Justice Kennard actually appeared before the Discipline Forces Commission, and he appealed for assistance. And I've criticized the authority, not him personally, but the structure within which he has to operate. Because when a complaint is made, if he feels it is a frivolous complaint, he can actually pick up the phone and call, the station or the commander and say, look into this matter. But if it's a serious complaint, he is obliged to forward that complaint to the Commissioner of Police. Now, Police Complaints Authority deal with complaints against the police. So what we are asking is for the police to investigate the police. Now, what Mr. Kennard said, if I can recollect clearly, because this happened 9 years ago, is that he needs an independent investigative capability. And this was a clear and firm recommendation. We made 164 recommendations from the Discipline Force Commission. What we said, give the Police Complaints Authority a team of investigators, so when something happens, they can go and investigate and report back to him. If prosecution is needed, or if some form of discipline is needed afterwards, that could be initiated. But right now, he's almost like a postman, that he has to take this complaint and send it to the very agency against which the complaint is being made. And he brought that to our attention. It's not something I'm inventing. This is something that was reported. Secondly, the Office of Professional Responsibility can only investigate, and correct me if I'm wrong, matters which are referred by the Commissioner of Police. They cannot undertake investigations of their own. They're not CID. They can't just go out on the street looking for complaints or hearing complaints. They are a part of the police force, and I think that is a limitation which the public must understand. What we need is to strengthen the PCA so that any member of the public, for example, Ms. Shawnette Grant, whose son was killed 3 Tuesdays ago, must be able to go and make a report. My son, 17-year-old, was shot dead, allegedly by the police, and there will be an investigation. Right now, we don't even know what investigation is being done. I hear the OPR is investigating. I called for a commission if that is being done. But there is need for a stronger investigative branch to look into these matters to protect our citizens.
Okay, thank you very much, Honorable Opposition Leader David Granger and former Police Commissioner and, of course, APNU Member of Parliament, Mr. Winston Felix.
Thank you.
Viewers, we are out of time. Of course, as I mentioned before, this is our final program for the month of September. So next week when you see us, we will be celebrating the People's National Congress 55th anniversary, of course, and the leader of the PNCR will also be here. We'll be back with you next week. As I always urge you, remember to be good Guyanese citizens. And I know Guy Expo is on this weekend. Many of you are planning to go and have fun, but please remember, if you're going to drive, do not drink. And even those of you who are not driving, be mindful of the amount of alcohol that you intake, because you can do really stupid things when you drink too much. Until next time, I'm Malika Ramsey. Goodbye.